Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills is where I talk about the books that I have recently completed reading. It's been a while since I've made one of these. I mentioned in a past video that we're getting ready to try and put our house on the market. That means a whole lot of painting, a whole lot of, fixing things around the house. So most of my time has been taken up with that, and I haven't had a lot of time to make videos. So I'm trying to make a couple videos today that, I can just kind of release over the next few days. And this one, I'm going to be talking about some books that I completed actually last month in March, so that I can then get on to make my March monthly wrap-up video. And I've got just kind of mostly a few shorter things here. The first thing that I read for this video, at least, is Served Cold, a HorrorTube anthology. And this was edited by R. St. Clair and Steve Donoghue, who, I think most people who watch this video probably at least know who Steve Donoghue is, I'm guessing. Just one of those young influencers. So this is a short story collection of horror stories that all have the theme of cold, basically holding them together. And all these stories are from HorrorTubers, okay? So YouTubers who dedicate their channels to horror, for the most part. I know that Steve Donoghue, he is not necessarily a horror guy, but he does edit and he writes the introduction to this, which, and he has a story in here as well. But in his introduction, he's basically explaining to the reader what BookTube is. So, just in case people come to this not understanding how it was created or the origins. And I gotta say, when you get things like this, you don't know exactly what the quality will be, of course, but I had a lot of fun with this. There were some really great stories. Steve Donoghue story, I enjoyed. He Takes Cold to the moon. So, he leaves Earth to find his source of cold, and that was a fun one. And there were some standouts in here, some ones that I really liked. There was one in particular by Andrew Leal, who does Grumpy Andrew's Horror Reviews, I think, or something like that. I guess I should look it up to get it right. Grumpy Andrew's Horror House, who I've been starting to watch his YouTube channel and really like his take on horror films. He approaches them in a way that I like to approach them, and I mostly agree with them, except for a few times. But I really liked his about a submersible. Two men inside a submersible. One of them's like this billionaire going down into the depths of the Arctic Ocean, and things go wrong, and he already establishes a nice sense of claustrophobia before you even start getting some supernatural elements. So definitely my kind of story. But yeah, this was a fun collection. I enjoyed this, and I think I appropriately finished this on the first day of spring, so just in time. I then read, because it was middle grade March, I had a couple things that I was thinking about reading. This is the only one that I ended up getting to during that month, and this is The Witchcraft of Salem Village, written actually by Shirley Jackson. So Shirley Jackson, of course, who is known for The Haunting of Hill House, We've Always Lived in the Castle, the short story The Lottery, certainly one of the most famous and celebrated horror writers of the 20th century, and deservedly so. She was excellent. And I had found out that she had written a middle grade, or I should say, a middle school level history of the Salem witch trials. And she is somebody who, of course, has written about hysteria, paranoia, the darker side of a town, like in The Lottery. So I was really curious to see what her take on this would be. And I gotta say, it was a very quick read, but it was surprisingly compelling and very insightful, actually. It's a narrative history, so she, presents it as a novelist does. And, it's certainly, there's some certain 1950s perspectives that come in here. It came out in the 1950s. But overall, I would highly recommend this to, basically a middle school age, even adults. Like I said, I had fun with this, but this is a great way to learn about what happened. She does add some great insight. one of the things that, I just hadn't really thought much about before, um, that, or maybe I had and I'd forgotten. She talks about how, of course, these girls are, putting on a performance inside the church, claiming, that they're being assaulted by, these witches. And, she reminds us that these Puritans who were in here would have never seen theater before. They would not have been used to seeing actors perform necessarily. So whereas this stuff might have, to a better trained eye, these girls' lies would have been much more transparent, a little more convincing for this time period. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I liked it quite a bit. So if anybody's looking for a very quick, simple introduction to Salem witch trials, Shirley Jackson actually does a very good job of it. And then the last thing that I'd read was for Women's History Month. Very thin little book. I had found this at a Goodwill. There's a charity shop in the U.S. And so I think I picked it up for maybe like $1 or something like that. And I had read Mary Beard's SPQR last summer and really liked it. So I thought, let's just check this out. And so Women in Power, these are really two lectures slash more like speeches that she gave dealing with women. And the first one is the public voice of women, and the second one is Women in Power. And what she does, she talks about the historical roots of, for instance, women being denied public voice, that being declared essentially the realm of men. In ancient times, in ancient Greece, one of the things that defined a man was his ability to speak out in public. And women were very often not just criticized, but, laughed at and made to look like buffoons whenever they were depicted as having public voices. The only time they were allowed to have a public voices was on behalf of other women, never over men. And she talks about that historical root and, of course, how it has come into our own era as well. And, she, of course, has to skip large time periods. But she does a pretty good job connecting the dots. And she does the same thing as far as women in power. And that has a lot to do with the way power is seen as an incredibly, masculine trait. And women are often seen as stealing power from men when they come up, rather than just, coming into it naturally. Women having to become, more masculine in their habits or in their look in order to, appear powerful. And, how we can certainly have more feminine instances of power as well. And once again, she goes through different historical examples. And, it's certainly very insightful. She calls this a manifesto. It's really a conversation starter. She does use contemporary examples. And because of that, this book is, I think, only about 5 years old. It already often at times feels very dated. So much has happened even in the past 5 years that, it does feel like, not that her commentary or her ideas are necessarily outdated at all. But the modern references that she gives already don't really hold much water. They're not as compelling, I guess I should say. So this is not a book that I'm going to keep. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with it. I'm glad that I read it. I do think that she has some valuable things to say in here. But again, it's really a conversation starter. Much more has to be done on these subjects. But those are the 3 books that I read to finish up March. So we had Served Cold, the HorrorTube short story anthology, and then The Witchcraft of Salem Village by Shirley Jackson, and Women in Power by Mary Beard. And that's it. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Right? Thank you, BookTube.